The morning the lieutenant ordered me to lead his column to the Salt Fork, I told him I would sooner be shot for it, and I meant the part about the shooting. I was 26 then, and I had scouted long enough for the army to know what a dawn raid on a sleeping camp looked like from the inside. The dogs first, then the women running with bobbies under their arms, then the smoke. He called me a coward and a few worse things, and he was within his rights to bring me up on charges. But there was a captain there who had seen enough himself, and he let me ride out with my horse and my saddle and nothing else, not even my back pay. I have lived a long time since that morning. I am old now, old enough that my granddaughters have to lean close to hear me, and I have told this story to all of them because it is the only thing I ever did that I am certain was right, and because of where it led me. It led me in the end across a river to a woman who had no earthly reason to want me and who chose me anyway. That is the whole of it. But the getting there took years and a good deal of shame, and I had better start at the beginning. I lost my brother Tom to that same kind of raid 2 years before I ever put on a scout's coat. He was 16 and freighting for an outfit that camped too close to soldiers who could not tell a peaceful band from a war party and would not have cared to learn the difference. The army said it was a regrettable thing and paid us nothing, and my mother never said his name again until the day she died. I joined up scouting partly to be near that world and partly, I think, to find some way to square it. What I found instead was that the men giving the orders had no more wish to square anything than the river has a wish to run uphill. So when the lieutenant pointed me toward the Salt Fork, I was already a man with a wound that would not close, and I would not put another family on my conscience to keep my wages. For 4 years after that I drifted and broke horses. A man who can gentle a wild mustang and never has to be asked twice can always eat, and I was good at it, better with horses than with people, my whole life. I came back into the Salt Fork country in a dry year, the kind of year when the grass goes to wire by July and the creeks lie down in their beds and quit. I had a string of green-broke horses to sell, and the only buyer worth the ride was the trading post out at Fort Lessing, which was no fort at all anymore, only a long, low store and a corral and a flagpole with nothing on it. The man who ran the post was named Harlan Voss, and he was also, by some arrangement I never fully understood, the agent responsible for the band that wintered along the Salt Fork, the people whose camp I had refused to lead soldiers to, though they never knew that and I never told them. It was Voss's job to see that the goods the government had promised those people actually reached them. Flour, beef, blankets, the things that were owed in exchange for the country they no longer ranged. It was a simple enough job. Voss had made it into a thing of beauty, by which I mean he had made himself rich at it. I was leaning on the corral rail dickering with Voss over the price of my horses when she came in. I did not know her name then. I knew only that she walked up to the counter the way a person walks who has done a thing many times and is tired of it, and that she set down a tally stick and a folded paper and began to read off, in plain hard English, the difference between what the paper said her people were owed and what Voss's scale had given them. She was perhaps 25, and she stood very straight, and she did not raise her voice once. 40 hundredweight of flour, she said. Your book says 40. Your scale gave us 31. I weighed it myself on your scale with your weights before your man could take them off the pan. Voss smiled the way a man smiles when he is sure of his ground. Scale settles in the heat, he said. Wood swells, iron don't. You ought to know that, smart as you are. Iron does not lose 9 hundredweight to the heat, she said. Iron loses it to a thumb. I had been a coward in plenty of small ways in my life, the way most men are, looking at my boots when I should have looked up. But I have a weakness, which is that I cannot abide a thumb on a scale, having seen what comes downstream of it. So I said, before I had decided to, she's right about the iron, Voss. The whole store went quiet. Voss looked at me as if a fence post had spoken. The woman looked at me too, and her look was not gratitude. It was closer to suspicion, and a kind of weary calculation, as if she were trying to guess what game I was running and how it would cost her people in the end. I learned, much later, that this was the only sane way to look at a strange white man who suddenly took your side. The ones who took your side were so often setting you up for something. "You want to sell me horses or you want to school me on my own scale," Voss said. "I'll sell you the horses," I said. "Weigh her flour again first. I'll watch." He weighed it again, with me watching and the woman watching, and it came out, by some miracle of honest iron, almost exactly 900 weight heavier than the first time. Voss made the correction in his book with a flourish, as if he were doing everyone a great kindness, and the woman took her corrected tally and her people's flour and left without a word to me. I sold Voss my horses for less than they were worth, because I had made an enemy of him in front of his own counter, and a man like that always finds the price. I want to be honest about that first day because the rest of it depends on the truth. I did not help her. I weighed some flour. She had already caught the theft, weighed it herself, named it to his face. She did not need a drifting horsebreaker to confirm it. What I did was small, and it was as much for my own old wound as for her. If I tell you anything in this story that makes me sound like a man who rode in and set things right, you stop me, because that is not what happened. What happened is that a woman named Naya spent that whole dry summer and most of the autumn deciding, slowly and against good sense, whether I was a man who could be allowed near her people at all. And I spent it trying to earn the thing I had no right to expect. Her name was Naya. I heard it the second time I came to the post, when a girl of 9 or 10 ran up to her and called it out, and Naya answered in their own tongue and then, catching me listening, switched to English as smooth as river stone. She was a healer for the band. I came to understand it was a thing of real standing among her people, not the small word healer makes it in ours, and she did the talking at the post because she had the English for it, learned partly from a missionary teacher she spoke of without much warmth, and partly, she told me once, from listening to men like Voss, until she knew the shape of every lie they used. The trouble that summer was not only the flour, the trouble was the horses. Voss had a side business, which was running stolen and rebranded horses east to buyers who did not ask questions. It is a simple enough crime. You take an animal with one brand, you alter the brand with a hot running iron, so the old mark hides inside a new one, you hold it a while, and you sell it far from where it was lifted. What Voss had figured out, and it was clever, I will give the devil that, was that he could lift horses from the settlers around Cottonwood Crossing, alter the brands, run them through a holding pasture, and then, when the settlers came hunting their stock, point at the Salt Fork Band. Everyone in the country was already primed to believe that Indians took horses. It was the easiest story in the world to sell, and it served Voss twice. It moved his stolen stock, and it built a fury against the band that he meant to use when the time came to have them pushed off the Salt Fork entirely. The Salt Fork bottoms were the best winter grays in 3 counties. Voss wanted them. He was a patient man, and he was building his case all summer the way he built everything, a little at a time, off the top, where no one was looking. I knew none of this in July. I came to know it because I know horses, and a rebranded horse, to a man who has gentled 1,000 of them, is as plain as a patched coat. I was at the Cottonwood Crossing livery in August when a rancher named Pleasance came in raging that the Salt Fork Band had run off 6 head of his good geldings, and the marshal, a soft, frightened man who did whatever the loudest voice told him, was already writing it down as fact. I looked at the one gelding Pleasance had recovered, the one that had wandered home, and I saw under the fresh Barvey brand the ghost of Pleasance's own lazy P, clumsy work, done in a hurry. Barvey Voss's brand. I did not say anything in that livery. That was the cowardice in me again, or maybe it was sense. I was a stranger with a bad name at the post, and if I'd stood up in front of Pleasance and the marshal and accused the most prosperous man in the county, I'd have been laughed out and worse, and the band would have been no better off. So I did the other thing. I rode out to the Salt Fork. I had never been into their camp. I want you to understand that I rode in expecting nothing but to be turned away, and that turning me away would have been the right and reasonable thing. 2 men met me before I was within a quarter mile, on good horses, with rifles laid across their saddle bows, and they did not point them at me, but they did not have to. I kept my hands where they could see them, and I asked, in the few words of their tongue I'd picked up over the years and a great deal of pointing, for Naya. They knew the name. One of them rode off, and the other one sat his horse and watched me, and we did not speak, and the sun was very hot. When Naya came out to the edge of the camp, she did not invite me in. She stood with her arms folded and the 2 riders behind her and said, "Why are you here?" "Vas is stealing horses around the crossing," I said, "rebranding them with his own iron, and he's letting it fall on your people. Pleasance already thinks you took his geldings. The marshal's already writing it down." She looked at me for a long moment. "We know this," she said. It stopped me, you know. "We know Vas steals. We know it falls on us. We have known since spring." She tipped her head, and her voice, when it came again, was very even, and that evenness was the hardest thing she ever did to me, harder than anger would have been. "What we do not know is why a white man rides 4 hours in this heat to tell us a thing we already carry, so I will ask again, why are you here?" I had no good answer ready, and so the true one came out, which is usually what happens when a man is caught flat. "Because once I was told to bring soldiers to a camp like this one at dawn," I said, "and I would not do it, and I have spent 8 years not knowing if that meant anything, or if I only saved myself the trouble of remembering it, and I lost a brother to one of those dawns before that. So when I see a man building a story that ends with soldiers riding into your bottoms, I cannot ride past it. That is the whole of why. It is not for you. I won't pretend it's for you. It's for the thing I couldn't fix." She did not soften, but something behind her eyes shifted and settled, the way the surface of a pool settles after you have thrown something in and it has gone to the bottom. "Get down," she said. "There is water for your horse." That was the beginning of it, not the end of her suspicion. That lasted a long while yet, and was wiser than my trust would have been, but the beginning of the part where she let me prove what I was, instead of telling me what I was. There is a great difference between those 2 things, and most of us never learn it. What followed was the slowest and most ordinary work, which is the only kind of work that ever earns anything real. I rode the country around Cottonwood Crossing for the better part of a month, learning Vas's pattern, finding his holding pasture in a box canyon north of the post, counting the horses there, and reading their brands through a field glass: Lazy P under Barvey, Rocking H under Barvey, the marks of half the ranches in the county hiding under Vas's iron like sin under a Sunday coat. I did not steal them back. A man who steals back becomes a horse thief himself in the eyes of the law, and I had learned by then that the law would be the thing that saved the band or damned them, and that I had better keep my own hands clean enough to swear in front of it. But I did one thing that was not strictly clean, and I will own it. 3 of Pleasant's geldings were still in that box canyon, freshly altered, the burns not yet healed. I cut them out one moonless night and drove them not to Pleasant's but to the Salt Fork, and I gave them to Naya, and I told her, "Hold these. Don't ride them, don't show them. When the time comes there'll be a man who can read a brand the way I do, and these 3 will hang Vas higher than any words. But if you ride them now, you'll be the horse thieves he says you are. So you have to do the hardest thing, which is sit on the proof and be patient while he calls you a thief to your face." She took the geldings, and then she said the thing I have carried longest. She said, "You are asking my people to be falsely accused and to stay quiet and to trust that your law will work in our favor at the end of it. Do you know how many times we have been asked to trust that your law would work in our favor?" "No," I said. "Many times," she said. "It never has." She looked at the 3 stolen geldings and at me. "But I will tell my grandfather what you brought. And what you ask. The choosing is ours, not yours. Remember that. Whatever happens, the choosing was ours." I did remember it. It turned out to be the truest sentence in the whole affair. I was at the camp more than I should have been that autumn, and the reason was not all Vas. The reason had a name, and the name was Naya, though it took me a shamefully long time to admit it even to myself, and longer to say one word of it to her. There is no decent way to describe the slow turn of a thing like that except by the small parts of it. I learned the way she ground dried bee balm and snake root for the fevers that ran through the camp in the bad dry weeks, and the way she sat all night with an old man whose breath came hard, and how she came out at dawn gray-faced and would not be thanked because, she said, thanking the healer was bad luck. You thanked the plant and the morning instead. I learned that she laughed rarely, and never at the things I expected, and that the first time she laughed at something I said, I felt it go all the way down to my boots, and I was ashamed of how much it mattered to a grown man. Her grandfather was the one the band looked to, and he was the one who would do the choosing she spoke of. He was very old and his eyes had gone milky, but there was nothing wrong with the rest of him. He let me sit by his fire after a while, and he asked me questions through Naya, and now and then he made a small dry joke that she would refuse to translate, which is how I knew it was about me. One evening he said something long, and Naya was quiet a moment before she gave it to me. He says, she told me, that a man who returns horses he could keep is either a fool or a man trying to buy something, and he wants to know which, because he will not have his granddaughter or his people be the thing a white man buys. The fire popped, both of them watched me. Tell him I'm not buying anything, I said. I gave the horses back because they weren't mine, and because a long time ago some men decided a camp full of sleeping people was a thing they could take, and I couldn't stop it, and my whole life since has been me trying to be a man who would stop it next time. That's all. There's no price tag on the bottom of it. If I'm a fool, I've been a fool a long while and I'm too old to change. The old man listened to this, and then he laughed, a real laugh, and said one short thing, and Naya would not look at me when she translated it. He says, she said, that you have at least answered like an honest fool, and that honest fools are rarer out here than horses. And then, because she was who she was, she added on her own account and not his, do not let it go to your head. The reckoning came in October, the way I had known it would. Voss had finished building his story, and he was ready to spend it. Pleasance and a dozen ranchers, stirred up and certain, rode on Cottonwood Crossing demanding the marshal lead them out to the Salt Fork to take back their horses and run the band off the bottoms for good before snow. The marshal, frightened of the mob and owned besides by Voss's good opinion, was halfway to agreeing. And Voss, the patient spider, sat in the middle of it looking aggrieved and reasonable, the long-suffering agent whose charges had once again disgraced his trust. There was one thing in our favor that Voss had not counted on, and it had come into the country only the week before. A circuit judge named Amos Caro, riding the territory to clear a backlog of cases, a hard old man with no patience and, more to the point, no debts to Harlan Voss. I had heard he was at the crossing. So when Pleasant's bunch gathered in front of the marshal's office, I was already there, and I had ridden in the night before to the Salt Fork and told Naya and her grandfather what I meant to try, and I had asked them, not told, to bring the 3 geldings in at first light, openly, to the courthouse and not the marshal, and to let the brand speak. It was the hardest thing I ever put to anyone. I was asking a people who had every reason to believe that riding openly into a white town with 3 horses would get them shot to do exactly that, on my say-so, on the strength of a stranger's faith in a judge they'd never met. The grandfather heard me out. Then he and the men of the band talked through most of the night while I sat outside the circle where I belonged. Toward morning Naya came and sat by me, which she had never done, and she said, "We have chosen. We will come. Not because we trust your law. We have decided we trust you, which is a smaller and more foolish thing, and we are doing it with our eyes open. If it goes wrong, it is still our choosing. You will not carry it." She paused. "But it will not go wrong. I will not stretch out the courthouse mourning, because the truth of it was almost quiet. Pleasant's mob came loud to the marshal's door, and Judge Caro, hearing the noise, came out onto the step with his coat off, and his sleeves rolled, and asked what in the name of sense was going on in a town where he was trying to get some breakfast. And while Pleasance was still bellowing about stolen geldings, Naya and her grandfather and two of the band rode up the street, slow and straight, leading 3 horses, and stopped before the judge, and Naya said in that plain hard English, "These are Mr. Pleasant's geldings. He says we stole them. Look at the brands." Caro was no fool, and he had ridden enough country to know a reburned brand when it was put in front of his nose. He had me come up. I'd given him my word the night before that I'd swear to what I'd seen, and I read the 3 brands aloud, the lazy pea drowning under the clumsy Barvey, and I told the judge where the box canyon was and what else stood in it, and that the iron that made those burns would be hanging in Harlan Voss's own shed if anyone cared to go and match it. Caro sent men to the canyon. They found 40-odd head under altered brands and a Barvey running iron with the scale still on it, and they found Voss's tally book, which that vain, careful man had kept honest for himself even as he cooked the government's, so that his own pages convicted him in his own hand. There was nearly violence in it even so. When Voss saw it turning, he tried to make it a fight, the way his kind always does at the end, shouting that the judge was being gulled by savages and a horse thief, putting his hand near his gun. It would have been the easiest thing for it all to go to powder smoke right there on the street, and for the band to be blamed for the blood whatever the brand said. What kept it from going there was not me. It was the grandfather who got down from his horse, an old half-blind man getting down slow into the middle of a dozen armed and angry settlers, and stood with his empty hands open at his sides and said, in English he had been hiding all along, the only English I ever heard him speak, "No guns, we came to be seen, not to fight." And the sight of that old man standing there with nothing in his hands took the air out of the mob the way nothing else on earth could have. Voss reached for his pistol and the judge's own men took him before it cleared leather, and it was over, and no one had fired, and the band had won it standing still with their hands open, which is a kind of courage I have never had and never will. Voss went east in irons to answer for the stealing and for cheating the government, which the army cared about a good deal more than it ever cared about cheating the band. The ranchers around Cottonwood Crossing got their horses back and were, most of them, decent enough afterward to be ashamed, and a few of them were even neighbors to the band after that, which is more than I'd have bet. And the marshal kept his job, because that is how it usually goes. The Salt Fork Bottom stayed the band's winter ground. They kept it in the end by their own patience and their own nerve and an old man's open hands. I had carried some water. That is all I ever did. I stayed in that country. I bought a piece of ground across the river from the Salt Fork Bottoms, not in them, across from them, which mattered, because I had no business putting myself in the middle of their lives like I'd earned it. And I broke horses there and made a small, honest living, and I waited, without much hope, to see whether a thing I had not dared to name would come to anything. It came to something on a cold, bright morning the next spring. I was working a young roan in my corral when I looked up and Naya was there, on the far bank on a paint horse, with a bundle behind her saddle. She did not call out. She sat the paint and looked at the river, which was running high and cold with the snowmelt, and she looked at me, and then she put the paint into the water and crossed it, the horse blowing and lunging in the cold current, and she came up the near bank streaming and stepped down in my yard. "My grandfather has given his blessing," she said before I could get a word out. "I want you to understand the order of it. He gave his blessing because I asked for it. I did not ask because he wished it. I am here because I chose to cross that river. Not because you saved us. You did not save us. We saved ourselves, and you know it. Not because I owe you nothing. The horses were never yours to give. I am here because I have watched you for a year be the man you said you were, every day when there was nothing in it for you, and I have decided I would rather build a life with that man than without him." She lifted her chin. "If you want it, and if you can live where 2 worlds rub, because I will not stop being who I am, and my people will not stop being mine, and our children will belong to both and to neither, and that is hard, and I will not pretend it is not hard." I was a long time finding my voice, the way I had been a long time finding it at her camp the first day. When it came, I said the only true thing, which is the thing I should have said months before. I have wanted it since you told me iron doesn't lose 900 weight to the heat, I said. I just didn't think I had the right to. I still don't think I have the right to. But I'd spend the rest of my life trying to be worth the crossing you just made. She almost smiled. Then take the paint, she said. He's cold. We were married twice. Once by her people in a way that took 3 days and that I understood maybe a third of and loved every minute of. And once by a circuit preacher so that the territory's law would call our children ours. Because Naya, who trusted no white law, was too clear-eyed to leave our children unprotected by it. We built on my side of the river, in sight of hers, and there was a worn footbridge between us within 2 years, because half her family was forever coming across and half of mine. For I came to count them as mine, and the river that had once been a line between two worlds became, mostly, just a thing the children fell into in summer. It was not all easy. I told you it would not be. There were men at the crossing who never did forgive me, and there were people among her own who looked at me a long time before they let me near, and they were right too, and I never blamed them for it. We lost a child young, the way people did then, and grieved her in 2 different ways under one roof, and somehow the 2 ways of grieving held us up instead of tearing us apart. Naya healed half that country, white and otherwise, in 40 years, and never once let anyone thank her for it. You thanked the plant and the morning. She was the proudest, straightest, most truly free person I ever knew, and she was free precisely because everything she gave, she chose to give, and would have it no other way. She has been gone 3 winters now. I am telling this to her granddaughters and mine, who are the same girls, because they ought to know how it really went. Not that a cowboy rode in and saved a helpless people. That story is a lie and an insult to her, and if you hear it told that way, you tell it back true. The true way is this. A long time ago I refused to do one wrong thing, and spent the years after trying to deserve that refusal, and an old man stood with his hands open, and a young woman caught a theft on her own scale and named it to a liar's face. And then, much later, on a cold spring morning, with nobody owing anybody anything, she put a horse into a high cold river and crossed it of her own free will, and decided that I would do. That is the whole of it. I have had a great deal of luck in my life that I did not earn, but that one thing that she crossed the river and chose me, I have always known was hers to give, and that she gave it free. A man could build a life on smaller than that. I built mine on it, and it held.